Okay, first and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Hakodash, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, Shalom to the hopeful elect. Now today, we're going to go through the parable of the tares and the wheat. You know, I came across a video of a COON, right? And when you see things like that, they're vexing. Right, they tend to piss you off. Sometimes it's funny, right, but more times than not, it's annoying, right, vexing. But then you have to come to the realization that maybe they're just, maybe they're not us, right? Maybe they feel or act, that way towards so-called Negroes because that's how they're programmed. So I'll jump right into it. This is Matthew chapter 13, verse 24. It says, tares among wheat, right? A parable that the Yahweh Shai had given. Verse 24, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. Right, and when we read in the explanation, it tells us that man is Yahweh Shai. Verse 25, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Right, in which that enemy would be mainly Esau, right, but these other nations as well, right, all our enemies, but mainly dealing with Esau, our number one enemy, as we read in Psalms 83. Psalms chapter 83, verse 1. Says, Most High implored to confound his enemies. A song or psalm of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O power. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And that's how all these other nations feel, not just Esau, Edom, not just the so-called white man, even though they're our number one enemy. Ultimately, all these other heathen nations want to get rid of us, right? And that's why the Lord's going to bring the judgment. He's going to bring vengeance on all of them, right? None of these heathen nations are safe, right? And that's why they're all going into captivity, in the kingdom of heaven. And they're all going to serve under us, the same nation that they want to be no more in remembrance. They're going to be working under. Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against the New World Order. Right? They all working together. Whether they act like they're not, right? It's something called controlled opposition. Verse 6, the tabernacles of Edom and Ishmaelites and the Ishmaelites of Moab and Hagarenes, and so on and so forth. Right, but then you see the first nation listed on there is Edom, right? Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, our number one enemy. Right, our twin brother, so to speak. Going back to the times of Jacob and Esau. But going back. Alright, Salakia for interruption, but continuing in verse 5. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Right, and we read in Psalms 83 how that main enemy, right, our number one enemy being Esau, Edom, but also all these other nations, right, and how they would have basically, sowed tares among the wheat is mixing in their seed with the seed of Israel, right? Going back times of slavery or colonialism, them raping our women, so on and so forth. But also, that being one of the main things, but also what we were scattered, Salakia, around the whole world, right? So you're going to have Israelites who look like all different types of people, right? But dealing with the tares, all right, and the enemies sowing the tares, that's specifically dealing with, how they basically came over here to the Americas and took our women, raped our women, right, during the times of slavery. And again, they took our women, raped our women, right? So that they're sowing tares among the wheat, sowing their seed among our seed, right? But that was back then. And nowadays, our women, right, they freely just, get with so-called white men, get with men of these other nations, creating more tares, right? Because then the child could come out looking like a Jake, but the whole time is not, right? Because we know that your seed line is dependent by your father, right? So whatever your father is what you are, right? So if your father is an Israelite, no matter what woman he gets, he can get with an Edomite or a Moabite, it doesn't matter, then you're going to be an Israelite. But verse 26, but when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. Right? So when the seed basically grew, what grew? The wheat and the tares, right? Which look damn near identical. Verse 27, so the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? Right? So didn't you sow good seed? Where are these tares coming from? That's not good seed. Verse 28, he said unto them, an enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? Right? So, Yahushua is letting them know, right? Him being the householder, right? The enemy came in and sowed these tares. But then they asked, right, the servants, so should we just go pluck them out, right? Go gather them up? But he said, nay, in verse 29, but he said, nay, lest while you gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Why? Because tares and wheat, they're almost identical, right? So we don't want you to mistakenly take up the wheat thinking it's tares, and that's, transitioning into the actual meaning. Basically, that's why you don't judge based off of appearance, right? You just preach the word to everyone, right? Because we don't know, right? We can't 100% tell if, okay, there's a white woman, right? And you're telling her, oh, no, this truth not for you, right? You're an Edomite, but you're going based off how she looks outwardly. Nah, you can't do that, right? Because she could be an Israelite, or you got people out here who teach, the black Hebrew Israelites, quote unquote, implying that it's only for the so-called black people. But not all so-called black people are Israelites. They would be considered tares if their fathers go back to one of these heathen nations. So that's what it's talking about. Don't gather, just don't even try to gather the tares, because you might take up a wheat, right? So at the end of the day, just preach the word. We let the Most High do the sifting, right? You could have two people in front of you, right? And you turn the so-called white one away and keep the so-called black one, right? You tell him the truth, but you turn the other one away, when the whole time the so-called black one is the one that's actually the heathen, and the one you just turned away because he looks like a heathen was the Israelite, and now their blood is on your hands. When the Lord brings the destruction, they're being destroyed because this whole time, they were being told that they're an Edomite or they're a Moabite because of how they look. So this word, this gospel isn't for them. So they didn't even try to, whole time they were an Israelite. So that blood is going to be on your hands. But at the end of the day, right, if you're of the Lord's elect, he's going to draw you to it no matter what, right? You're going to come into it no matter what. Right, so verse 9, but he said, nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, right, the reapers being the Lord's angels, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Right, and when we go down and read the explanation given, we know this is talking about the end of times, right, the end of the world. Gather ye together first the tares and bind them in the bundles to burn them, going into that second death, right, by fire. But gather the wheat into my barn. Right, the wheat going into the barn being the Lord's elect of Israel being beamed up into his chariot, right, to escape the destruction, to escape that second death that he's going to bring upon his second return. So we jump down. The tares explain. It's Matthew chapter 13, verse 36. Then Yahushua sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. Right, so that being Yahushua. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, right, which we know is who? Israelites. But the tares are the children of the wicked one, right? That main wicked one being who? Esau, Edom, right? But as well, you know, these other nations. The enemy that sold them is the devil. Again, Satan, Esau. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Right? So going back to verse 38, the field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom. Right? So the good seed are the children of the kingdom, which is Israel. They would be the ones that grow into the wheat. Right? So then the question is, how do you know if you are a child of the kingdom or not? Right? Because yeah, your seed line goes back to your father, but it's impossible for someone to really truly trace their lineage back so far. Right? It's impossible. So how do you know if you're, Israelite or not? It's by your spirit. Right? Again, with your seed going back to your father. So if your father was an Israelite, then you would be an Israelite. Then the spirit within you would be the spirit of an Israelite. And the only way to tell that, right, the way the Lord sifts that is through this word. Right, let's grab Amos chapter 9. This is Amos chapter 9, verse 9. It reads, for lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations. Like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Right, so for lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations. That right there is letting you know that Israelites are scattered everywhere throughout the world. Right, we're among all nations. That's why you can look like any nation. Right, and that's why what? You just preach to everyone. Right, this word is for everyone to hear. Because why? The Lord is going to do the sifting. As it says, I will sift the house. He's doing that through the word. Right, if you're of Israel, then this word is going to resonate with you in some way, shape, or form. Right, even if you don't end up becoming a believer, because ultimately that's just the Lord turning you away. But only Israelites are going to hearken to this word. Yes, shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Right, meaning, yeah, the Lord is going to have an elect, right, who lives through the judgment he's going to bring. But at the end of the day, all of Israel is going to be saved. Right, shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. So even from the least of Israel, they're all going to be saved, because in the end, right, those who the Lord judges, right, they take part in that second death. They're going to be born into the kingdom where they will, be able to take part in the promises, right, showing you the Lord's mercy. But the main point being, and I will sift the house of Israel among all the nations, right? So the Lord is doing this sifting through the word, right? Where it's not up to us to determine who's an Israelite and who's not. The Lord knows, his angels know. So going back to Matthew, the field is the world, but the good seed are the children of the kingdom. But the tares are the children of the wicked one. Right? So the Lord is going to sift among all nations to find his people. Right? And if you have the true spirit of an Israelite, then the word is going to resonate with you. You know, let's grab Romans. Tom. Who the hell is Tom? It's Romans chapter 8, verse 14. It says, for as many are led by the Spirit of the Most High, they are the sons of the Most High. For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of the Most High. Through the Spirit, you'll know if you're a child of the Most High or not. Right? If you're truly a child of the Most High, then you're going to hearken to this word. Verse 17, and if children, then heirs, heirs of the Most High, and joint heirs with Yahushua, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. Right? And this is really going into his elect, right? The elect men. More importantly, right, becoming joint heirs with Yahushua, suffering, you know, through the trials and tribulation, right, and enduring unto the end, and taking part in the glory, right, with Yahushua, reigning in the kingdom, having the everlasting life, the bodies. But ultimately, as we read, that's coming to all of Israel, right? At the end of the day, we're all going to take part in the kingdom, right? Whether you be of his elect, right, Lord willing, we be of that number, or you're part of the 2/3 who has to be reborn in the kingdom, right? But that's the mercy that the Lord is showing us. Even the wicked of his people, he's showing mercy. But going back, verse 40, as therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and them which do iniquity. Right? So not only the tares, which are ultimately heathens, but all of them which do iniquity. Right? So even the wicked of the Lord's people, they're all going to, as we read, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire, there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Right? So ultimately, if you're not a part of the Lord's elect, you're getting thrown in that furnace of fire. Right? All the wicked doers on this earth, whether you're of his people or not. If you aren't of his elect, then there's no hope for you. You know, but no one knows if they're a part of his elect or not. That's why what? We give diligence to make our calling and election sure. All right, let's grab Revelations chapter 21. It's new heaven and new earth. We jump out here, verse 6. And he said unto me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of water of life freely. Right? And this is Yahushua, right? He's the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. That being what? Right? This the living waters, this truth, this word. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, his power, and he shall be my son. Right, as we just read in Romans chapter 8, he that overcometh shall inherit all things. Why? Because those that endure, right, and overcome all the trials, right, they're going to be made joint heirs with Yahweh Shai, right? And that's what we're giving diligence to reach, that salvation. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Right? So that second death is for the tares, but as well as all of those that commit iniquity, right? Live in iniquity. They're going to take part in that lake of fire, which is the second death, right? Because you had the first death during the time of Noah, was that great flood by way of water, and this death is going to be a lake of fire brought to you by not only the nuclear missiles that are going to rain down on this place, but as well as the lasers from the Lord's chariots, right? When he returns with all his angels to bring the judgment, that's going to be that second death. Right, so, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Right, so who has ears to hear, let him hear. Right, not only, physical ears, right, because everyone has physical ears, but spiritual ears. Right, those who have the ears to understand and perceive and to hearken. So all in all, quick summary, basically, the tares would be basically heathens who look like Israelites, right? And that's why, the famous saying, you don't judge a book by its cover, right? We don't judge a book by its cover, because at the end of the day, only the Lord knows who is who, right? So with that being said, Lord's willing, this video was edifying, uplifting, or informative in some way, shape, or form, right? And once more, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'asham Yahweh Shai, Ba'asham Rakah Kodash, and double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, and shalom to the hopeful elect. Okay, first and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'asham Yahweh Shai, Ba'asham Rakah Kodash, and double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Now I came back, right, to add one more thing, right, which is a visual image of what a tare would be like. Right, so here you see this is a interracial couple, right, with mixed kid, quote unquote, according to this world. They would be considered mixed, right? They'd be black and white. But we see here that the father is a so-called white man, which, the white race, quote unquote, would be the Edomites, right, identified today. And in which we see here, the mother is a so-called black woman, right, which would be a so-called African-American woman, which is identified as the tribe of Judah today, right, Israel, right? And we see their children. Now, looking at their children, they look more African-American than white, right? So you have some people who would say, okay, they're Israelites. That's if you go based off of appearance, which is wrong, right? Because according to the Bible, right, you are what your father is, right? And we can prove that real quick. It's Numbers chapter 1, verse 18. It's verse 17. And Moses and Aaron took these men which are expressed by their names, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward by their polls. Right? And a pedigree goes back into your lineage, right? So they declared their lineage after their families by the house of their fathers. Why? Because you are what your father is. So if your father was an Israelite, then you're going to be an Israelite. That's how the Lord determines what spirit to send in your body when you're born. right? So according to the Bible, these children would be considered Edomites, even though they look more so African American, right? But they would be considered tares, right? And that's why the scriptures say, you know, when they asked, should we just go and gather up the tares? It was like, nah, you know, lest you root up the wheat also, because they look the same, but they're not the same, you know. But that's going based off of appearance, because we really don't even know if this man right here is an Edomite himself, right? There's truly no real way to tell what his lineage goes back to, right? What his seed line goes back to, thousands and thousands of years back. We can't tell, but that's why what? As we read, just grab it again. Right, Matthew 13:28, he said unto them, an enemy has done this. The servant said unto him, without then that we go gather them up, right? Speaking about the tares, but he said, nay. Why? Lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them, right? So this was the whole, basically the whole problem in the parable. The wheat and the tares are identical, right? The tares look like the wheat, but the tares are the bad seed, right? The tares are heathens. They might look like the wheat, the good seed, Israel, but they're not. So nah, don't gather up in case you root up the wheat too, right? We're just going to let the angels handle that in the time of the end, right? So that's why now what? We just preach the word, right? Let the Lord do the sifting. You know, the Lord knows who's who. You know, our job is to just preach the word, edify. You know, so with that being said, once more I'd like to give our praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakah HaKodash, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Shalom to the hopeful elect.